evening, everyone. All right, well, welcome to Open Forum. Any newcomers to the Open Forum? All right, welcome, welcome. My name is Dr. Hunter Peterson. I'm the Clinic Director of Coeur d'Alene Healing Arts, and Open Forum is a monthly get-together we have here at Pilgrims the first Wednesday of every month in this room at 6:30. And our kind of get-togethers, I call it Open Forum because it's really an opportunity to dialogue about health, anything related to health. And in fact, I want to know your questions, to kind of have a conversation. It's not a lecture per se, but you know, interrupt me and ask a question or bounce stuff off me. That's really where I have fun, is versus just talking out to all of you. So how we usually organize this is I come prepared with a formal topic to discuss, and out of kind of just respect for those who have time obligations, I usually go into that topic first and kind of review what you all came to hear about. But if you have individual health questions, what I like to do is start the lecture off by recording those questions and then coming back around to them at the end of the lecture. So, just to be aware, we do record these. So on our website, cdahealingarts.com, if you want to come back and review or point them out to a friend, we have that, and we have some info about our clinic in the back, as well as just some details about the upcoming detox, which I will go over at the end of this lecture if those of you who are interested. Let's start off by getting some questions on the board. What is there out there that people want to learn about? Yeah, Lisa.
I have a question regarding calories. How important is it to watch your calorie intake?
Okay. In relation to weight?
To exercise.
Okay, exercise, okay. And I'll kind of tie that into weight as well, because that's a more commonly, focused on thing. Okay. What else? Yeah, Lane, what else?
Causes of thyroid dysfunction.
Yeah.
Symptoms, causes.
Okay.
I'm just wondering how detrimental is this smoky air to our health, and what can we do to try to prevent or
Yeah. What to do about it. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, should we all be wearing masks at this point, or?
Yeah.
Go to Hawaii.
No kidding. There's no smoke there.
Volcanoes.
Yes.
My question is along that lines too. If you have to be out doing vigorous work in this smoke, what to do about it?
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Got it.
Help for migraine headaches.
What's that?
Help for migraine headaches.
Okay. In terms of treatments and then understanding what may contribute to them. Okay.
Trigger.
Yeah. Okay. What else?
One more real quick.
Minors, of course.
Alternatives to Tylenol,
Yeah.
just for straight pain, for whatever you're,
Yeah.
whether it's from detoxing or what have you.
Okay. What others? Anything else? Anything at all?
Do you want more?
No, not necessarily. I just like to make a good opportunity. If there's any you shy people out there. But no, this is plenty. We can work with that. And if something else comes up, of course, just throw it into the conversation. All right. So today I'm going to talk about detoxification medicine. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I love detoxification medicine. It's kind of, from my little personal history for me, is that it was one of my first kind of most powerful experiences with naturopathic medicine. In my training, I did some detoxification with one of my mentors and had a pretty profound health impact from it, and kind of really inspired me to pursue this on a deeper level and kind of really incorporate it into my practice. So what we'll be talking about today, in large part, are some of the most fundamental tenets of naturopathic medicine, and it personally have a huge role in my health and life as well. So let's talk about detoxification by starting with breaking down the word. And I think the root of that word to really begin with is toxin. So what is a toxin? Well, toxins are substances that create an irritation or harmful effect in our health and in our biochemical or organ systems. So any substance. So where does that come from? A lot. So we think of external sources, right? A real obvious one that was just brought up is the smoky air. So we can inhale toxins. We get that from industrial particulates, we get that from smoking, we get that from breathing in air that has somehow been adulterated mostly with human waste products of some type. So that's inhalation is a major way, pesticides, etc. Ingestion, probably the biggest way we expose ourselves to toxins. Right, we ingest foods that have pesticides or chemicals in them, or kind of fertilizers. We ingest a lot of stuff that's on our food. We ingest all sorts of substances related to those exposures. Food additives, hormones, heavy metals, medications can be considered toxins, or a lot of the byproducts from medications. That was someone's question. What can we do instead of Tylenol, right? There's a toxic effect from Tylenol that's well known on the liver. So another way is physical contact. We touch things all the time. Even simple things you wouldn't think about, like receipt paper, has tons of estrogen byproducts on it. So every time you touch a receipt, you're rubbing off endocrine disrupting chemicals onto your hand, and those substances do absorb through the skin. So those are just a few of the external sources of toxicity that we're exposed to all day, every day. And of course, there are internal stressors, and these are actually, interestingly, in my opinion, probably the more significant forms of toxins that enter our body or get lodged in our body. So one of the things to be aware of is that the creation of toxins is actually a normal process in the human body. So our immune system, for example, creates free radicals to destroy bacteria, fungus, and viruses. So we're actually creating toxic byproducts to kill off things we don't want to have in our body. I would say the biggest single source of toxicity in the human body is byproducts of food reactivity. So we all think of food as, oh, well, we just need food and it doesn't matter what it is. Well, actually, it really does, especially on a very personalized basis. And I would argue that the majority of what Americans eat is not even what I would define as food currently in a kind of our modern society, and probably for about the last 50 to 80 years, it's really been changing. And those byproducts, those kind of industrial byproducts that we're calling food, have really toxic effects in the body when they break down. So much of the toxicity we deal with relates to those breakdown products that cannot be used as medicine, but instead lodge into tissues as toxic inflammatory byproducts in the body. A lot of that has to do with the mediation of the gut microbiome. So we got all these organisms in our guts, and they have a major role in digestion and a major role in how our physiology works. So how our food interfaces with the intestinal lining and the microbes in the gut is a big part of what drives toxicity. And something I don't mention much, but I think it's really powerful, is overeating is actually a major source of toxicity. And we do a lot of that. Or eating too fast, or eating poorly in terms of how our hygiene of eating is a tremendous way to create toxic byproducts in the body. Another one that you might not immediately think about is thoughts and emotions and stress can be toxic. very toxic. And actually we can physiologically measure the consequence of stress in the bloodstream by the amount of waste product derived in the process of burning through hormones and burning through neurotransmitters and burning through biochemical constituents when we worry and we stress and we have emotional upset. So there's a very real toxic effect literally that can be created from that. Also very importantly, elimination, right? So we're talking a lot about how toxins come in, but what if they're getting stuck in and can't get out? So if a person has compromised elimination, whether that's the bowels or the lungs or the kidneys, the skin, then we're essentially accumulating and backing toxins up in the system, which is kind of a lead into what detoxification is all about, is really enhancing elimination. Questions so far about toxicity? Okay. So what are some symptoms of toxicity? Well, it's hard to argue that any single health symptom is not related to toxicity. I would argue that any symptom we experience, especially on a functional level, could be an example of a toxic expression the body is trying to create. The most prominent, I'd probably say, is fatigue, headaches, sleep issues, irritability, mood swings, joint aches, pain just anywhere, redness, skin irritations, eczema, itching, rashes, allergy symptoms, seasonal allergies, allergies to foods, digestive problems of all types, nausea, bloating, gassy, diarrhea, constipation, sleep issues, frequent colds and infections or weakened immune system, very common breakdown product of toxicity, wheezing or lung difficulties, menstrual or hormonal difficulties, weight gain, a major symptom of toxicity, and foggy thinking, impaired cognition, brain fog. A lot of people can kind of resonate with that symptom. That's major toxic byproduct. So those are just to name a few. I mean, we could go on, but that's kind of a starting point. So if we know a little bit about toxicity, where it arises from, what are some example symptoms, what do we do about it? Well, this is where the realm of detoxification comes in. And, you know, if we're talking about toxin is the accumulation of some harmful substance in the tissues that impairs function, then detoxification is the neutralization, transformation, and removal of a burden from the body. And usually that involves dietary or lifestyle changes that, number one, diminish the intake of toxins, and number two, enhance elimination. So we got to do both, right? We can't just eliminate toxins, because if we're bringing them in just as fast, then we're at a net zero. So we got to focus on both ends of that equation. Questions? Okay. So let's talk about a very, what we think about. Everyone has a different picture in their mind when they say, well, what's detoxing? To one person, it's taking a bunch of supplements and powders. To another person, it's fasting on water. To another person, it's taking one food out of your diet, like sugar. And the answer is those are all correct. Those are all forms of detoxification. It really has to do with how dramatic of a response and pace you want to go at it with. So the most gentle form of a detox is to say, I'm not going to eat bread or wheat for the next 6 weeks. Right? That's a detox. Or I'm going to avoid processed foods. And many of us can attest to that's a really hard thing to do, actually. But nevertheless, it's one form of detoxing. Another way of doing so is to eat all raw fruits and vegetables, an exclusively plant-based diet, which, as you'll see what the Detox Our Clinic does, is a component of that detoxification program. There are also product-based detoxes, as I mentioned. You can get online and find, you know, a 3-week cleanse with these 5 powders and 20 capsules you take every day. I'm not personally a very big fan of those types of detoxes because I think they create more work for the body then they actually help, and we want to be unburdening the liver when we're detoxing, not loading it up with a bunch of supplements process. But nevertheless, that's a really easy, straightforward way that a lot of people do detoxing. There's also juice fasting, and we're going to kind of get into this term fasting, which is really all about holding fast is kind of where the term fasting comes from. So it's essentially to withhold food, or in this case, juice fasting would be withholding solid food entirely from the diet. That is also part of the juice detox our clinic does that I'll be introducing. That is, again, in a food-based sense. And of course, the most extreme form of detoxification is water fasting. In water fasting, the only thing that is consumed is water. And in a sense, that is understandably the most aggressive form of detoxification, because all of the energy, the fuel that our body uses to function, in that case is being derived internally. And so water fasting is something that I do with patients, but it's under a very strict supervision with really close following, because you can have very serious problems appear if you're not really watching someone closely in terms of their vital signs, electrolyte balances. But water fasting also has a profound therapeutic benefit. I've seen dramatic things like blood sugars drop by 300 points and blood pressures drop by 40 or 50 points within days of water fasting. But again, it's something really structured and best done almost in an inpatient environment. So for our purposes, and most of my patients who have lives to lead and can't just quit their job for 3 weeks and drop all their responsibilities, in the middle is probably a better place to land. And that's kind of what we'll be discussing more in detail. Yeah?
How long do people usually water fast for?
It depends.
3 days,
The longest I fasted someone for is a week on water, but you can go months. I mean, there are facilities in the United States and in Europe where they're literally dedicated to that therapeutic modality. And of course, they're inpatient and there's blood work being done, and people can go for months. And again, the changes are profound. And things like stories like, one of my mentors talking about observing a facility like that where they had to go repaint the room of a smoker because it was so intense, the toxic discharge, that it never left the treatment room he was in. So yeah, it's pretty powerful, but it's really not something to just dabble with.
So with the water detox, can you still exercise during that time?
I don't recommend it when I water fast people. Yeah, gentle walking, but there's just, it's so easy to pass out if you're exerting yourself too much. Yeah. So, I think it's kind of cool, being a history nut myself, to talk a little bit about the history of fasting. Well, it's actually, in my mind, nature's most ancient way of healing. And one of the things I point to about that is, if you've ever observed a sick or injured animal, if you watch them closely, what you'll see is they stop eating. First thing they do is they stop eating. And there must be some pretty powerful wisdom in that. If every animal species known, that is their innate response to an injury or a trauma or an illness. We see that in our own illnesses, right? If you get a really bad cold, really bad fever, you don't want to eat. I mean, that's the last thing on your mind. Why is that? Well, it's the body's wisdom telling us that we need to reallocate energy and resources to other functions. So fasting is an ancient healing tool. It goes back really to human origins. I mean, if you look at quote-unquote father of Western medicine, Hippocrates, primary tool in healing was fasting. You can look at all of the philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, major proponents of fasting. Physicians, famous physicians throughout European history, Galen, Paracelsus. You may not have heard of these names, but these were monstrous figures in the history of medicine. Major proponents of fasting to cure all manners of illnesses. And of course we have religion, right? Spirituality. Every major faith and religious kind of foundation has fasting as a component of it. It may not be days at a time, but fast till sundown, fast for a day. There's major components spiritually around fasting, and I think that really, further enhances how huge of a tradition this is in our being as humans. And yet, when you talk about fasting with people, there's a huge cognitive dissonance there because our modern society has gotten so used to this pattern of we eat 3 meals a day and snack 2 or 3 times, and it's just really distorted from our evolution, which is actually humans evolved in a very much feast or famine method where you might be going for days without food. And in fact, our physiology is incredibly well adapted to fasting. We're really well designed to switch gears and spare protein and spare muscle and kind of move through that process. It's part of our obesity epidemic is that we don't have periods of fasting and famine. We only have periods of excess and eating all the time, which is kind of hard on our systems. We're always working at digestion. So fasting allows an opportunity to take a break from digestion and reallocate resources, as I was mentioning. So a little more about the history, kind of clinically speaking with fasting. The nature cure movement in Europe, so to speak, which kind of emerged in the 1700s, 1800s, was kind of the precursor of modern naturopathic medicine in the United States. Fasting, detoxification was central to that tenet of medicine. And in fact, there were sanatoriums and these retreat centers where thousands of people literally on a monthly basis would go and fast and spend time in sunlight and escape from everything and cure immense degenerative illnesses and acute illnesses. So major history in Europe that's kind of been preserved to today. It was migrated to the United States in what was called the hygienic movement in the late 19th century, late 1800s. The hygienic movement was all about fasting, clean eating, good hygiene, hydrotherapy, sleep, kind of those types of principles. And it was kind of, again, one of the main precursors to my profession, which emerged in the early 20th century, of which, again, fasting and detoxification has always been core to our principles. So what are those principles of fasting? So first and foremost, we're really keying in on, I would say, the core principle of naturopathic medicine, which is the belief and understanding that at root, the body has the capacity to heal itself, right? The healing power of nature and the human body. And I fully believe that in every one of my patients, our job is to unencumber the body's healing force and enhance it in whatever way we can. So that's our foundation, is that we already have within us everything we need to heal and be healthy. We just got to get out of the way of it. And that's where the conversation about toxicity comes in, right? And how toxicity gets created and how to get rid of it. So first and foremost, remove obstacles to health. Okay, so again, in the context of detoxification, that's decrease intake, decrease exposure, and enhance elimination of toxic compounds. So how are we going to do that? Well, I'll get into that in a sec, but that's a major focus of ours in terms of removing obstacles to health. We want to improve circulation. Okay, so the old naturopathic philosophers, so to speak, the kind of individuals at the core of the professional identity, they really felt that all disease comes from impurity of the blood and stagnation of the blood. It's kind of called the unifying theory of disease, right? That all disease arises from accumulation of morbid matter. That's the term they use. We're using the term toxicity. So one of the key elements of removing morbid matter or toxicity is move the blood. If it's all circulating in the blood, we have to mobilize those toxins to remove them from the body. So when we detox, a major focus is enhancing circulatory pathways. Some of the ways we do that in our work is contrast hydrotherapy, exercise, dry skin brushing, massage. These are all great tools that, again, in the detox, we'll go into a lot of detail about how to enhance circulation via these types of tools. And on a really basic level, right, exercise, great way to move the blood. So part of the reason why exercise is so beneficial to health. Questions so far about principles, history? Okay. Next, we already spoke about this, enhancing elimination.
Here's a question.
Yeah, please.
Probably too detailed.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
Well, I
that's good.
just heard that, how we take care of our bodies as far as the food and everything, we can actually get to the point where we change our DNA, and then we're actually helping the next generation by
Yeah.
having better,
Yeah.
so if we can.
For sure, yeah. And what you're kind of speaking to is something called epigenetics. I actually have a recorded lecture on that topic from one of these forums
Oh, yeah.
that we talked about that for an hour and a half. But the concept being that when we did the Human Genome Project, we learned that, well, we actually have way less genes than like a rat does. So what's that about? You know, shouldn't we, being more complex individuals, have way more genes to express? And what we learned is that the genes that we have are highly susceptible to the cellular environment in which they exist. So that if we make choices like how we sleep, how we stress, how we eat, how we move, those have a profound impact on how our genes express themselves. And that we can essentially turn on and off switches based on how we live our lives. We've learned about 90% of gene expression, those are the forces that enact it, to name a few. And so in a sense what you're saying is, yes, and in fact what we're learning as well is that not only can, in our present lives, we impact the expression of our genes, but in fact we can actually transmit that information to future generations in terms of the cellular environment and how that impacts the genetic expression of future generations, especially in utero. I wouldn't say we necessarily change our genes. We technically can't change our DNA, but we can change the forces that impact the DNA, and transgenerationally speaking. So yeah, it's pretty profound. Elimination, right? We talked about it. So we want to really focus on enhancing elimination whenever we're doing a detox. First of all, because if we're detoxing, we're liberating into the bloodstream a lot of toxic byproducts out of the tissues. Partly why circulation is so important is because we need to get the toxins to the organs of elimination. If we don't have circulation and we have elimination blocked up, all those toxins we're dumping into the bloodstream just start swirling in our architecture and create a lot of physiological stress. So I think a lot of detox programs really fall short by not accounting for the critical importance of circulation elimination. So in our detoxes that we do at the clinic, there's an entire lecture dedicated to circulation and elimination and ways to enhance elimination. So we're talking about, well, how do we work with the liver, major organ of detox? How do we work with the intestinal system and bowels, major organ of detox? How do we work with the lungs? How do we work with the kidneys? How do we work with the skin and the lymphatics? And many, many methods to utilize in assisting in amplifying elimination or the opening of the eliminatory organs. So really important in any detox to highly, highly emphasize that piece. Questions about that? Yeah?
Not about that, I'm just a little confused still. So
Yeah.
we eat, and we eat toxins or whatever, but the idea of the detox is, how does it actually work? How is it actually releasing these toxins?
Yeah, great question. So again, first and foremost, we're preventing the intake, right? You can't forget about that, that's big, right? Because the thing that you'll be doing with a detox is highly restrictive comparatively to what most of us experience on a daily basis with what we consume.
Okay.
And ideally, we're not just detoxing our foods or really changing our intake of foods, but we're changing our intake of toxic responses in terms of the emotional impact, et cetera, eating habits, et cetera. So that's one thing. But secondarily, how do we actually detox? This is where I'm really highlighting that concept of really reorienting the focus of where our body puts its energy. Okay, so we spend about 40% of our energy digesting our foods. So when we fast on juices, for example, there's zero energy output to digestion. So essentially you're on digestive rest 24 hours a day throughout that entire process. And in the context of that, that energy has now freed up for other purposes. So we can literally move into the tissue structures and go about the process of repair and regeneration and renewal, and kind of scrubbing out through detox on a cellular mechanical level, removing toxic debris from the actual cell structures and mobilizing it into the extracellular space and then into the bloodstream. And then once it's in the bloodstream, we can push it to the organs of elimination and dump it. Of course, it has to go through the liver and these other organs, but that's a big part of what you're doing there. So really, it's a matter of, again, first and foremost, stopping bringing in all the stuff that we do every day, and then really reallocating all these resources to, deep cleaning, essentially, all the cellular structures.
So the body automatically starts to detox.
That's
once
right.
it's done processing.
Right, yeah, and so you'll see things like, what you'll see is, almost everyone's like, oh wow, my tongue's really coated, my breath smells bad, my urine is smelly, my bowels have a film on them, my skin is sweating out, strange odors, and that's very common because we're actually literally pushing things out. And sometimes that can be unpleasant and not feel great. That's why we have to be really careful about how we go about it, be very methodical about easing our way into it and easing our way out of it, as well as really enhancing elimination so things don't get stuck up and held up in the tissues. And we'll notice things like, increased sense of smell and touch and taste and hearing. That's very common as the body literally detoxes and becomes more in tune with our surroundings. So, yeah, so that's kind of what we're getting at. And again, part of the depth of that conversation is way more detailed in the class, where we really talk about the physiology. But that's kind of just a primer on it. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
When would there be cases where that a person shouldn't detox?
Yeah, contraindications is a good question. Pregnancy, breastfeeding, chronic liver disease, especially if it's active, like hepatitis, cirrhosis. Liver ends up having some work to do in a detox, so we don't want to overburden the already compromised organ. Children, especially children under the age of 10, I would not want to do that because there is a calorie deficit that happens when we detox, so we don't want to hamper growth development. And outside of that, there's no other, to me, absolute contraindications. I have caution with individuals who have cancer. I think it's one of my best therapies for cancer, but I want to be very personalized about it. Diabetes, we got to be pretty personalized. People who are on a lot of prescription medications, we just have to really be careful. And part of the detox we do at the clinic, one of the big emphases is it's very personalized. So I am working with you side by side. You have my cell phone number. We're kind of stepping through this process together with modifications being known even before you start the cleanse, so that we make sure to account for individual circumstances. But those would be the contraindications to doing this particular detox. Yeah. Other questions that have popped up? Okay, so we were kind of talking about organs of elimination, talked about the biggies, and then I was going to go to the next major principle, which is repair the gastrointestinal system. I feel, and granted this is my bias as a naturopathic physician and the tools that work for me, but I believe that really the seed of most illness, especially chronic illness, starts in the gut. And it kind of makes sense if we think that, well, if all of what we're made of has to do with what we eat and what we absorb and what we break down, If that process is deranged, there's going to be big problems. So a lot of us have intestinal symptoms, but I would argue that many of our global symptoms, whether that be migraines or joint pains or earaches or allergies, can really be traced, for the most part, back to dysfunction in the gut lining, an inflamed gut lining, an imbalanced gut flora. So when we detox, this is a major focus, and specifically when we juice fast, we're essentially putting the intestinal system on bowel rest, which means that instead of spending 18 hours a day digesting food, we finally can actually focus on repairing and recovering that tissue, right? Our guts need a break sometimes, and that's sometimes the very best medicine. Of course, we're going to enhance that with the juices we're doing and some of the other protocols that we'll discuss in the detox, but we want to ultimately repair the intestinal lining as understanding that digestion and assimilation is really central to our well-being. So that's a big focus of the program that we do at the clinic. Okay. Number 5, stimulate the liver. So I'm going to highlight the liver as an organ of elimination, but it's not just an organ of elimination, it's a major organ of how the body truly detoxes. We kind of have heard of the organ, or the liver as our main filter in our body. It's a filter. So not only is it really important for packaging up nutrients as they come in, but as it filters the blood, it's going to grab toxins, convert them, neutralize them, and ultimately package them in a form for elimination. So what we do in the detox, we do a major liver flush, kind of liver activator at the beginning for the first few days. We emphasize liver-specific fruits and vegetables as the choices that you're going to be consuming. We talk about nutrients that enhance liver function, and we work on stimulating the liver through different topical and internal therapies. So major focus is, helping that organ out, which is again why I argue taking a bunch of supplements or powders is maybe not the best move, because it creates more work for the liver, and if we're unburdening all of these toxins into the bloodstream, the liver's already got a lot of work to do. So, last of all, but I think one that we can really miss on, and I know from personal experience, because I always do the detox with the class, stress can play a big role in detoxing, or lack of stress and peace, I should say. Inner calm can really enhance a detoxification. So there was a year where I was traveling on either end of the detox. I had slammed at the clinic, and it was amazing how much less benefit I got from the detox, even though I did it to the T, how I do it every time. So transforming stress is a major piece of a really successful detoxification period, and we focus on that in the classes, that let's try to create a space at a time for self-reflection, self-love, and self-healing to whatever degree we can in our lives. Granted, we still have to lead our lives, so we can't eliminate everything, but we can certainly create an intention around that when we're detoxing. Questions about any of those other principles? Okay, so I talked about some of the signs of toxicity. I just kind of want to go over some of the benefits people report to me or are observed when we detox. Probably a big one that everyone asks about, and probably the number one reason people do detoxes, is weight loss. That to me is a side benefit, but I'm going to mention it because most of the time people swing between 5 and 12 pounds of weight loss in our 2-week program we do. And it is, adipose loss. You gain a little bit of that inflammatory weight back, but most of it stays off if you, kind of resume with the correct structure from a lifestyle and diet standpoint. So that's a positive benefit. Weight loss can benefit a lot of conditions. Energy, huge change that most people notice. Maybe not during the detox always, but certainly after, and often during as well. Improvement in digestion. We just talked about repairing the digestive system. So a lot of changes are often seen with the digestive process. Less bloating, less gas, more normal bowels, less reflux, those types of things. More calm and peace on an emotional level, a sense of ease. Very, very common to see in kind of a consequence of a detox. Reducing risk for chronic disease, or diminishing the expression of chronic disease. Things like diabetes or blood sugar issues, blood pressure, cholesterol, all sorts of chronic complaints like asthma or chronic eczema or chronic migraines. You know, a lot of these syndromes are very powerfully influenced by a detox. I actually use detoxes diagnostically with a lot of these symptoms because it's so amazing how much they can diminish or eliminate altogether when we detox. Concentration, clarity, we talked about brain fog, a lot more clearer thinking process, improved sleep, improved regulation of hormones and menstrual cycles, reducing inflammation and pain, right? Inflammation to me is synonymous with toxicity. Pain is another expression of inflammation. So I'll see people come in with, you know, serious chronic pain and have it just go away. I actually had a major acute injury prior to one of my detoxes, and it just blew my mind how much it changed a severe sprain I got into almost no pain. So that's a big one. Yeah. Oh, do you have a question? Sorry, I thought you were raising your hand. Anti-aging effects, I mean, lots of that. I really think detoxing is one of the best longevity tools there is. I think a biannual or once a year detox is one of the best things we can do for longevity and aging. So those are just a few. I mean, I could go on and on again, but I kind of wanted to highlight some of the biggies. Although I do want to point out one thing which I find incredibly valuable for participants, which is the concept of identifying reactivity to food. So part of the challenge of knowing what foods you're reactive to is that we have an ongoing level of inflammation that's so significant in our systems that when we eat an inflammatory food, we can't tell if it's a problem because we're already dialed up to 11 in the inflammatory response. So having a little bit more of that, you can't really tell. Doing a detox essentially dramatically clears out inflammation from the body. And so when you go about meticulously reintroducing foods, which is a huge part of the program, then it's amazing how well you can identify sensitivities to foods. And there's a lot of ways that we discuss how to identify obvious things, but also more subtle things, to find out that a food's an issue. Doesn't mean it's an issue for the rest of your life per se, but identifying sensitivities can be a really valuable thing. And it's a very clean and scientific method to do so. So that's another benefit in my mind of doing a detox. Questions? Yeah.
So you're saying find out which foods that you might have a sensitivity, that you can find out like different ones, like.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I wish we all just had one food sensitivity, but most people have several. Yeah. So there's other ways to do that, of course. There's expensive testing, there's genetics. We utilize a lot of those other methods in the clinic, but the best method for detecting food sensitivities, the gold standard, is elimination challenge. And a detox is essentially an elimination challenge, just a pretty aggressive one. So you eliminate all the potential offensive foods, and then one by one you reintroduce them. And that's a big component of how we move through the detox reintroduction phase. Actually, the whole second half of the detox is actually reintroducing foods in a very methodical manner, which I'll say for most people is the hardest part, because we want to just jump back in, but you can really unwind a lot of the benefits by rushing that part of a detox. And that's also hardly ever talked about if you get online and read about detoxes or ones you've done in the past. They don't really emphasize that part. That part is critical, and not only because you can identify food sensitivities, but you really want to lock in the benefits of what you've just created in your system. So, yeah.
Can you kind of just do a quick timeline of your detoxing?
Yeah.
Because you say you work up to it. And
Yeah, that's right what I was getting to. So you're right on it. So, you know, I wanted to kind of lead into, I totally forgot to bring flyers. I think we have one little one in the back. I don't have one for you to take home, but our fall detox is coming up at the Coeur d'Alene Healing Arts Clinic. We're just right downtown. So this is, I love doing this every year for myself. I'm kind of, a little selfish in that it's a great excuse for me to do it, and it makes me feel great. But also, I love doing the class because it's a wonderful, empowering education tool for patients or prospective patients or community members, because we're going to step through a 3-phase program over a series of 3 meetings. And the context of that is not only to really educate you about what we just skimmed the surface on tonight, but to go into a lot more detail on a lot of these principles and tools, and also really provide an opportunity to have some mutual support. I think a lot of the challenge for people in doing any diet or detox or whatever is when you're out there on your own, it can be challenging. So every class, we begin each class by, let's talk about our experiences, let's talk about our observations, let's go over questions. It's kind of a conversation like we're having here, where we sit in a big circle and just, kind of go through what that detox experience is like, and that collective support is a great thing. So the 3 classes we're having correlate with each of the 3 phases of the program. So how it's designed is that we meet the day before phase 1, and we review what that is going to look like. Then we meet, and that's a Thursday, so we start on a Friday. Friday, Saturday, Sunday is the phase 1, which is also called the bulking phase, which is essentially leading into the fast. So we're going to do an all fruits and vegetable based protocol that incorporates some liver flushes and a few other features. And then we reconvene on that 3rd day, on a Sunday kind of afternoon, and we prep for phase 2, which is the juicing phase. And we review experiences, and we do a major highlight of elimination and circulation in that class. And then we get back together the following Thursday, which is day 4 of the juicing phase, which is kind of, at least for the standard program, the juicing is about 5 days. So on day 4 of that, we get together and we review, again, progress. We go over the last, and I would argue most important phase, which is the reintroduction phase. And we spend a little bit of time on, well, now you did the detox, you made it, yay, what's next? How do we orient you towards a lifestyle, a dietary approach that is going to lock in your benefits and kind of give you that launching point, that reset button? I didn't mention that, but to me, the reset is something that's so valuable to people. It's like we're in bad habits, and we want to get out of those habits, but that painful separation, tediously about mind over matter, kind of with the food, for example, is a hard thing. So if there's a structured detox we have, where we've got to follow these boundaries, it can really allow the body an opportunity to reset habit loops. And it's a perfect opportunity to launch into a new commitment around food or around a lifestyle focus for you. So we talk a lot more in detail about that. A couple of other features about the program is, as I mentioned, it's guided 100% by myself as a physician through the program, so we can be in touch as much as we need to, whenever we need to, through that program. It's personalized, so I'm going to be taking down, if you're not a patient of the clinic, any health information or focuses that we want to have, and kind of customizing parts of the program around that. We're going to make sure that it's compatible with your daily commitments. If you're a mom with kids, if you work a 40-hour-a-week job, I mean, that's okay. We can do this in the context of that. It's great if you have the time off, but most 99% of us don't, so you can still participate in that context. And just to kind of give you guys a little perspective about the program we do, I think personally at the clinic, we've led in the last few years maybe about, I don't know, a couple thousand people through it overall in the last 5 years, and then in the last 20 years through my predecessors, a lot more than that, which is where this was kind of originally derived, is one of my mentors. So it's got a big track record. I mean, it's been really refined. So I feel very confident that medically speaking, it's a good design. As I said, these are the dates. September 28th, October 1st, October 5th. I kind of like to do these group ones where we can change with the season. It's a really good time for the body to detox. So those are the dates we will be doing it. If you have to miss a class, we can kind of accommodate for that. We even do some of these for distance for some people. So if you can't make one of the dates, it's not like you can't do it. And you can even nudge the beginning before a little bit or after a little bit. I like us all to be on the same schedule, but I know sometimes that can't work perfectly. So just knowing there's a little flexibility around that is a good thing for you guys to know. In terms of cost, and kind of what's included, is it is $100 to be a participant if it's a first time. If you're auditing or repeating the detox, that's we do it at half the rate. That includes, obviously, that one-on-one guidance, all the classes, and all the materials that are associated with a pretty comprehensive, big, thick guide that you'll get for the detox, not only to help move you through it, but in the future, to have a very meticulous roadmap to refer to if you want to repeat it. So the tools you will need, obviously the food is not included as part of the cost. It's all food-based, which is another thing I really love about this program. So all we need to do is have good, clean, healthy foods. And the tools you will need for the juicing phase or the fasting phase are a blender and a juicer. So if you don't have one, easy to borrow one, easy to pick one up at a thrift store, or secondarily, Pilgrims has a juice bar, Wellness Bar has a juice bar, there's one, forgetting the name of the other one that my staff told me about that's kind of out on 95 ways, but there's a lot of places where you can have the juices made. So if you're not into the whole pressing juices yourself, that's no problem. Yeah. Sorry, Lita, go ahead.
Could you tell me why you would need a blender and a juicer?
Because in order to keep the bowels active in moving toxins through elimination that way, we need to do a high fiber smoothie every morning in the juicing. Unless everyone wants to do an enema every day, which most people aren't into, we need to do something to keep the bowels active because that's actually the biggest organ of elimination. So there's a smoothie that everyone consumes first thing in the morning every day. And that, you need a blender to make that.
So did you say a blender and a juicer?
Correct, both tools. Most people typically have a blender, not everyone usually has a juicer.
So a Vitamix would only be considered the
Blender,
juicer?
the blender, yeah.
Okay.
A juicer is something that removes the fiber from a substance. So it literally spits the fiber out the back and you preserve those highly nutrient-dense juices. Which again, if we want to shut off digestion, that's critical because all that fiber is what really needs the digestive energy.
Do you have preference versus auger or centrifugal?
Yeah, and again, we'll get more into that, but the best is an auger or what's called a masticating juicer that crushes the vegetable. Centrifugal or centrifugal juicers are fine. It's actually, I used one of those forever. Good old Jack LaLanne. So, I mean,
Everyone has one of those.
yeah, those were great. They don't keep the juices quite as vital for as long. And
it breaks them down further is what you're saying.
yeah, and they kind of devitalize more quickly in terms of the enzymes and stuff and the plant nutrients in the juices.
Is that like a time deal? So like if you have it in the fridge, or is it you can?
Yeah. So with the ones that are masticating, they'll usually last over 24 hours. With the centrifugal ones, I ask they consume within the same day, so within 12 hours. Refrigerating them sustains them for longer.
So for argument's sake, if you juice it and drink it right away, neither one makes a difference.
No, I would still say that masticators are better. Higher quality juice, higher nutrient content. All things being equal, but it's by no means a requirement.
Okay.
Are there any brands you talk about that you
Yeah,
like?
Omega and Champion are they're the oldest in the field. I'm sure there's newer ones, but they have a really good track record. They've been around a long time. They make great juicers. What other questions about anything in the lecture, what the program looks like? Context. Yeah.
Is there ever a time that you want to juice fast longer than 5 days?
Good question. Yeah, all the time. I have the longest I've fasted a patient for is 28 days. I like to go in intervals of 7. Obviously, it takes a particular predisposition. Usually, there's excessive calories to let go of in those circumstances. But yeah, all the time. And in fact, a big part of the third class is discussing the possibility of extending the juice fast, what context to do that in, and even considering the potential of water fasting for a day maybe, or something. Which is the best time to do a water fast is kind of sandwiched onto the end of the juice fast. Yeah. Yes?
So so I found myself wanting to be a part of this, but I haven't been a patient since 25 years
Oh,
ago.
sure. Yeah, and
when
how does
does
that
the
work?
time come? Do we meet you? How do you?
Yeah, so
PR
how that
stuff?
works is, again, what I like partly about the juice detox is it's not require that you're a patient. So you can tell your friend about this lecture night and say, hey, do this with me, or your spouse, or whatever, and that's great. What I do in that circumstance is, if you're an old patient, I'll dig out your chart, I might do that, but usually I send out 2 weeks in advance or a week in advance an email to the non-patient participants where I ask about any limitations, health concerns, things to be aware of, or focuses for yourself in advance, so that I have literally a file on you in the class that I can be cognizant of and make any modifications prior to or at the beginning of the fast.
Yeah, because you had talked about having more of an almost
Personalized approach with
personalized
it.
program.
Yeah.
And one-on-one, I went, well, how do you know? who I
Yeah,
am,
so
what's up in my
So
life?
for it's a non-patient, it's going to be, that email communication is going to be the initial insight. But again, I create a lot of space in those classes we go through tons of questions. I'm like, hey, but in my situation, how do I do this? Or you call me and you say, hey, let's talk more about this. I'm not sure about how to go about this. So I think my feedback has always been that it's been well kind of accounted for, the kind of personalizing features if they're non-patients. Yeah. What else?
Well, I'm a little confused what happens the first 3 days.
First 3 days it's a detox, but we talked about scales of detox. So the only thing you're eating is fruits and vegetables. That's it. Yeah, salads and steamed veggies
And then it goes to just juices.
low glycemic fruits. Yeah, so you're doing a more gentle detox, and you're scraping the colon out with all this fiber to kind of empty that kind of toxic burden there.
And so I've never done this, so it sounds scary to me,
Okay.
that I would feel
Sure.
weak.
Yeah,
Like,
good question.
Totally like, oh my
You
gosh,
know-
will I be able to make it through for the
Yeah,
next?
so that's interesting you say that, and I think from a mental standpoint, that's by far the biggest barrier, right? It's because, we've never gone out without food for more than a day or even a meal. So how could I go 5 days without meat and protein? And I think it's by far a mental block that most of us have. And universally almost, everyone says, wow, I've had 40 participant detoxes where, not a single one has dropped out, everyone's made it. So it's actually, physiologically, we're very well designed for it. Would I recommend really aggressive, high-intensity exercise during the juicing? Probably not. So within reason, you can maintain your exercise kind of commitments, but if you're doing like, a hardcore strength and agility kind of class, I wouldn't probably do that in the midst of the juicing. But walking and being on a bike and even gentle jogging and all that stuff's great. Yeah, Margaret?
Can I tell you I'm a weenie? And I did it last time. You're not hungry at all.
Okay.
Plenty of energy. It really,
Okay, that's-
it really was really good. I felt bad for her because we were having like a group luncheon and she's like, oh, no, I'll bring my own stuff. And she sat down at the table and brought out, she
More
ate
stuff than you
more
were-
than any of us. I
Yeah.
couldn't eat it all.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice contrast because by the end of the third day, you're so sick of chewing that you're like, don't give me anything more chew. And then by the end of the juicing, you're so sick of not getting to chew that you're ready to chew again. So, yeah, it's kind of a good
It's a
balance.
deprivation.
Yeah.
And then it's really nice to chew.
Yeah, and I
So
would,
then after that 5 days, then you start adding foods?
Yeah.
Okay.
for the typical program, if someone wanted to extend, you'd go beyond.
Right.
But, and it's a very methodical reintroduction. And I would say, to your comment, one of the most profound things that people come out of this with is a whole new orientation to our relationship with food. I mean, it can really shift. And for me, every time I do it, it creates a shift, even though it's a little less and less over the years. But I'm amazed at how it changes my sensitivities and my cravings and my palate for meat, or, you know, it's pretty interesting how that shifts. So it'll be a cool thing to witness. Yeah.
Years ago I just want to tell you this, I did one for 30 days, it was a prayer fast, and I can tell you, I had so much energy, I felt like more energy than I'd ever had in my life.
Really?
Yeah, so it was hard to start eating again, you know, it was just like, oh my God, I felt like I could tell.
Yeah, like if you do especially if you choose to add like a water fast to the end, I mean, not uncommon maybe to need to sleep for just 2 or 3-4 hours tops, you know, and you'll just be wide awake, alert when you wake up. So it's amazing how the body, the physiology changes in detoxing and fasting. Yeah.
I was wondering how this is done at a distance. I don't know if you're in this business.
Yeah, so usually what I do in that context in the future, and actually this go round, I'm hoping to make some really nice videos and eventually have it as like a resource online. But usually what I do at a distance is I do a visit with the individual. It's kind of, I mean, we can't go to as much detail, but we really methodically go through the protocol from top to bottom, and you kind of begin with the class and then communicate with me as needed. And we issue the guidebook and go through all that. So it's a little different, but I've had people really love that too. So it's definitely an option. So we just schedule something ahead of time so that we have a conversation around the onset when the class begins too. What else? What other questions about the program?
Did you say you go off your supplements, your vitamins?
Yeah, most people, and we go into detail about that. So hormones, medications stay in place. There's a few supplements I recommend to maintain, but for the most part, we want to take a break to kind of allow the body to focus on the detox pathways. There's a couple of supplements I usually optionally recommend, but by no means are they required, and they're available at the clinic for purchase, or you can get them wherever you want to. But oftentimes we'll try to assist the liver a little bit, but generally speaking, we don't do a lot of supplementation. It's all food-based. Yeah.
So how do you know if it works?
Well, as I like to use that term, the proof is in the pudding, right? So, you know, it's how you feel afterwards. I mean, I've never heard someone to say that they didn't experience some significant changes, and most of the time they're positive. Now, during the detox, that's not always a positive per se that you're experiencing, but that's a classic detox reaction. And we talk about what that looks like and how you can experience that. On the most basic level, I was talking about, you know, coated tongue and mucous membranes have congestion or slimy stool or whatever. But, you know, you can get headaches and you can get profound fatigue as your body starts to detox. That's all those toxins hitting your bloodstream and, you know, the impact you're feeling from that. And again, on the flip side of that, there's, after those toxins are all out, there's a very much, the baseline is a lot higher than where it started for most people. So, yeah. Mary?
I just wanted to add to that, sometimes what you find is you won't know everything right afterwards, like maybe you won't feel that much different, but it's more of a long-term, that's what happened to me, there was a long-term benefit that I didn't really know until about, I experienced the next 6 months of my life, and then I thought, wow, that was really a different winter.
Yeah. Yeah, right, and that's a very common thing, like, you know, people with, chronic immune dysfunction or a chronic congested sinus tract passage, how that can just kind of dissipate and really hold over a long time. I mean, some of these benefits, if you reintroduce foods correctly and really, you know, follow that to a T, are long-lasting, and that's really critical about it. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
How long does it take to do the reintroduction? Because I'm looking at the dates there.
Yep.
and it's saying, I don't know if I can-
Technically, the reintroduction takes about 5 or 6 days. From a practical standpoint, you can hold most of the benefit with condensing it into about 4 days. So I don't really like going less than 4 days, because then you're really pushing it with how quickly the body can reintegrate dense substances like meat and dairy and stuff. So 4 days probably is reasonable. So in other words, it says it's a 14-day juice detox. You can probably manage it in 11 to be fully reintegrated.
And so could you, like, instead of juicing for 5 days, is there still a benefit if you did it for 3 days and start the, if you had something going
Sure.
on those days, start the reintroduction?
Yeah, and I do, personalized adjustments, or people who are experienced with this. We do mini detoxes. I mean, of course, it's designed the way it's designed because this is what clinically we've found to be the optimal kind of generalized setting, but people can benefit from more, people can benefit from less. It's just depending. So if you told me, like, man, I'm leaving town on the 8th, how can I do this? Could I still do it? I would say, yeah, we would just either start it slightly early maybe, or shorten a certain phase of it. We might even shorten like a different phase. So it just depends.
So what kind of communication would happen before the 28th? It sounds like it begins on the 29th.
Yep,
And
so
I can see
before
a whole bunch of us taking out here at 7:30 finding stores that we
Yeah, so one of the things I do is, a lot of people worry about getting the foods ahead of time. I still think the best.
That's in the fridge, so
Yeah, well, we coordinate with the grocery stores too. So I think the best is to get it fresh, get it right before you're starting, so then the food is the most vital. But if you're worried about that, what we've done now is we send a prep email to all the participants a week beforehand that includes the one-pager on the bulking phase food shopping list. So if you want to get ahead of the ball, you can do that shopping ahead of time, so you're not that evening rolling into your shopping. And we do that, a week ahead of time. I send out a pretty detailed instruction on, hey, if you're hooked on caffeine, here's some strategies to start to get off of it before the detox, and some of those types of things, so that you have some really strong guideposts to get you towards it. And as I said, the non-patients, we have another separate detailed email.
I don't mean to be a dead horse, but
Yeah, sure.
so on the third phase,
Yeah.
do you do something like 2 meals of juice, then 1 meal of something? Is that how
No, it's all food-based again. The first day back is kind of like the bulking phase. I mean, it's all fruits and vegetables, nothing else, and then you build from there.
So you're not adding meals in yet?
Well, you are. You just, you're stopping juice fasting and resuming solid foods.
Okay, so really the 6th, 7th, October 6th, 7th, 8th, and whatever is going to be more like the 28th to the 1st.
Yes, except it's going to be expanding every day.
Expanding.
So during that period, you're going to reintroduce legumes, and you're going to reintroduce eggs, and you're going to reintroduce, eventually meat, and so it's stepping through very methodical phases and observing feedback from that. Yeah. So we say it's 2 weeks because really you're only truly fasting through day 8. But as I said, the most important part is that reintroduction. So if you get in your head that I just got to make it 8 days, then it's all off the table, then you're going to screw it up. Yeah.
Is Pilgrim still going to offer a discount?
On this one, it was my bad to not coordinate way ahead of time with them. I like to do it on these days, and Thursday, and they did not have any Thursdays in the fall available. So that's why it's going to happen over at the clinic this time. In the spring, I'm hopeful it'll happen back here at Pilgrim's. And that's also why I wanted to mention to all you, we really have to cap this one out at 20 participants. So, last spring we had like 35. So, those seats do fill. So I was going to say on the back counter, if you didn't write your name on the little thing, little sign-in sheet, if you're interested in this and want my staff to reach out to you to kind of reserve your seat, then please do give us your name and phone number and email so that we can connect if you're not a patient, because I think we have like 4 or 5 signed up right now because we have a few weeks, but now that it's kind of coming up, want to do it, we get you in there because we just have a space limitation. So, and unfortunately, pilgrims, because we're not aligning with them for this, we don't have a little small discount set up with them. So, yeah. Any other questions about the class and what it'll look like? No, it's okay. Yeah, sure. Go for it.
I was just thinking of when you dye my hair, is that, you know how, the dye kind of, it's getting into your skin,
Sure, yeah.
Is that going to affect that?
Well, I mean, certainly if we're talking about not bringing in toxins, again, yeah, I wouldn't probably, I probably wouldn't do it during,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, but I'm not telling you not to dye your hair per se. Yeah, I mean, it probably would be something you want to avoid.
Do it the day before.
Yeah.
There you go.
I'll get rid of it. Yeah. Any other questions about the class or the detox kind of concept? Okay, awesome. So we're actually amazingly before 8. This is awesome. We're still in our time window, but if you need to scoot, welcome to. Won't be offended. But I want to take a moment to kind of move through these questions. We're going to take care. So a question had come up: calorie intake, exercise, and weight. And I think the main actual question Nita had was, do you really need to account for calories if you're vigorously exercising? In terms of having a deficit, is that kind of what your concern was? Yeah, I think, elite athletes, they need to take in a lot more calories. People who do Ironmans will take like 6,000 calories in a day versus the typical recommendation, which is like 2,000. So it absolutely matters. It depends on, the degree and severity of your workouts, and what weight you're trying to maintain and what your muscle mass goals are, of what those calories are composed of and how many. So, in other words, yeah, you don't just eat the same no matter how much you're working out. And I think our hunger largely gauges that. I mean, if you go on a 12-mile backpacking trip, you're going to be able to eat a lot when you get back, right? So, for sure. Caloric restriction and weight, I think we got to be really careful there about calling all calories equal. So that, in my experience, is not the case. It really matters what source they come from. And we'll talk about this in the detox. It takes as much energy to get the calories out of protein as you actually get from them. So a lot of weight loss programs have like insane amounts of protein. Well, why is that? Because you're working so hard to digest that protein that you're not getting any net calories out of it. So similarly with carbs and fat, we say, oh, well, fat has way more calories. Yes, it does, but a lot of people's metabolisms with how the hormonal signaling works, it ends up signaling the body to take those carbs and convert them into storage forms of fat. So that quote, calories in equals calories out is just not true. Because a lot of adult Americans have major metabolism issues around carbs. So generally speaking, if weight loss is a goal, we really want to de-emphasize carbohydrate sources, just as kind of an aside. Questions about that further?
So for just someone that isn't exercising a lot, but just, day-to-day, just
Yeah.
average person, should they be watching their calories or not?
I think they should be watching their hunger and the quality of the foods they eat. So if they're eating no vegetables, you could eat a lot of calories without eating a lot of volume. But if they're eating a lot of, fresh fruits and vegetables, mostly vegetables, then, and putting good fats on them, I think you don't watch it. You just use your hunger and gauge by that. And again, I think our hunger is very distorted for most Americans. This is why doing a detox or something is such a good thing, because it really resensitizes us to actually what real hunger is and how we're more emotionally eating versus eating because we're hungry. Causes and symptoms of thyroid dysfunction. Well, gosh, that's a big topic, but I'll take a stab at some of it. Yeah, so thyroid is this gland that sits on top of our throat. It's a butterfly-shaped gland. We hear a lot about it because there's an epidemic of thyroid dysfunction in modern society. I have a lot of speculations as to what that is, but let me talk a little bit first about what the thyroid gland does. It's a major regulator of metabolism. So thermoregulation, thyroid plays a big role. Energy synthesis plays a big role. Alertness, other hormones and neurotransmitters are partially regulated by thyroid. It regulates sleep to a degree, it regulates mood to a degree, it regulates cholesterol and, again, metabolisms of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. So it has a big role because it puts out thyroid hormone, which has huge, huge biochemical consequences in the body. So if the thyroid is dysfunctional, it can cause a lot of symptoms. Fatigue is a big one, weight gain is a big one, constipation is a big one, dry skin is a big one, hair loss is a big one, high cholesterol is a big one, depression is a big one. So those are just to name a few. But so of course the challenge here is that all of the symptoms I just described can be caused by a lot of other things. So I get people coming in a lot saying, I'm worried I have a thyroid problem, I have these symptoms. Well, yes, but those symptoms could also be 100 other things. So I screen a lot of people for thyroid, but you know, it's not necessarily something that comes up all the time, but it comes up often. And some of those symptoms I discussed are some of the most prominent ones. Causes of what creates thyroid dysfunction. One of them is that lack of iodine in the diet. Thyroid hormone, iodine is a central molecule in, and we have poor sources of iodine in our foods. Part of the way modern America's got around that is we iodize salt, but a lot of people don't eat iodized salt. Really good sources of iodine are seafoods and seaweeds, probably the best dietary sources. But a big problem with the iodine issue is not just that we don't eat enough of it, but that we are exposed in our environment to all sorts of iodine displacers from the body. So all of our water is chlorinated. Many people's water is fluoridated. Bromine is in a lot of substances that we consume. These are all what are called halogen molecules. They're in the same column in the periodic table as iodine. So they displace iodine in the body. That is a big problem, and I think a big source of iodine or thyroid-related disease. Another cause of thyroid dysfunction that I find very prominently is adrenal dysfunction. So the adrenal glands are the ones that make our stress hormones. A lot of chronic sustained stress in our modern culture, and therefore we have a lot of dysfunctional adrenal glands. Adrenals support the thyroid gland, and when the adrenals aren't functioning well, thyroid can start to not function well. So that's another very common thing I see in terms of causation. Another big cause, number one cause of hypothyroid or low thyroid. I should stipulate that what I've been talking about is low thyroid. A very small number of people have hyperthyroid, too much thyroid output, and it's essentially opposite symptoms. But the number one cause of low thyroid in the United States is autoimmune thyroid disease. It's also called Hashimoto's thyroid disease. So this is essentially an autoimmune reactivity, meaning our own immune system's attacking our own cells in the thyroid gland. And the autoimmune process is what triggers that. Again, many causes. It could be a virus or a bacterial infection, but oftentimes it's psychological stress mediated. It confuses the immune system. Similarly, inflammation. So much inflammation in the body, eventually the immune system starts making mistakes and it starts attacking its own cells. So those are some of the main causes I see with autoimmune Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And I always like to check for Hashimoto's when I see hypothyroid, because it's often present. So is that a good kind of intro?
What's a goiter?
A
How's it
goiter,
related to thyroid?
yeah, a goiter is another term for swelling of the thyroid gland. And again, you can have hypothyroid without a goiter, you can have hypothyroid with a goiter, you can have normal thyroid function with a goiter. But it's essentially a nodular expansion or a diffuse expansion of the thyroid gland. You can palpate that often. And, go ahead.
Most of the women, my sisters and their daughters and everybody, have very thick necks, and they're all swollen, and it's the goiter, and they want to remove them, all the thyroid. And I was just wondering, is that a good thing to do, or is there
Well, ideally,
another way to get rid of it?
we would try to understand what's causing it. You know, there has to be something causing that. And if you can identify and remove the cause, the goiter will often shrink and dissipate. But it's a detective work, right? And obviously thyroid workups are part of that, but there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, I have cysts I call them cysts, but I had them all over my thyroid, and my thyroid was working fine.
Yep.
So the doctor said well, we can take that out. Well, he took part of the thyroid with it, because you can't not do that.
Yeah, it's hard to save all the thyroid tissue.
And so then, without full thyroid, I have to take pills the rest of my life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely not the ideal approach if you can avoid it, but you have to be willing to do the work to treat the causes, to avoid that. Yeah. Smoke, particulates, health consequences, treatments. So, yeah, I mean, this smoke does have a health impact on us. Is it a long-term impact? I think not. Especially, again, great time to talk about detox if we're focusing on what creates health or what, accumulates toxicity and how to get rid of it. It's pretty transient. But the concentration of particulate right now obviously is dramatically higher than what is typical. So again, back to our detox principles. What do we want to do first and foremost? Don't put it in our body. So I'm jumping a little forward into the treatments is, be inside, stay in an air-conditioned space. If you have an air purifier, especially a HEPA-based one, use it. Don't open your windows at night. Spend as little time outside as possible, and wear a mask if you can when you're outside, especially if you're sensitive. Obviously, a HEPA filter mask is like the heavy-duty stuff, but then you look like kind of an alien when you're wearing those. So, but if you're really sensitive, it'd probably be worth it. So I would, say, for Mary's question of, I'm thinking your son's probably outside working all the time, like, may look silly, but even just a simple mask will dramatically reduce the intake of that particulate. Just a simple, like, dental mask, So health impacts, most obviously the lungs, right? The first organ it's going to hit is the airway and then the lungs. So people have been reporting to me burning throats, cough, burning in the lungs, and then discharge from the mucous membranes like the sinuses and the eyes, which are obviously more sensitive tissues that are directly exposed to the smoke. Again, with people who are vulnerable, people who have, elderly with diabetes or on immunosuppressive meds or immunodeficiency syndrome, the worry there is that that inflammatory, irritated response could lead to being a good breeding ground for a microbe. You get pneumonia or whatever microbial illness, but that's really only in immunocompromised people. People with asthma, though, right, this is a more serious problem because airway reactivity to those substances. But generally speaking, those are pretty small populations, and those are really the biggest worries. The rest of us just kind of want to try to steer clear. In terms of treatments, besides avoiding staying inside, windows closed, either air conditioner filters or HEPA filters, there's a lot of soothing agents we can use for the mucous membranes. So, they have a tea here called throat coat tea, or if you have slippery elm tea or marshmallow tea or ginger tea, these can be really nice and soothing on the lung and esophageal lining. There's some good kind of agents to open up mucous membranes, like N-acetylcysteine I really like. That could be used, but outside of that, it's real focused avoidance and maybe some particular practice of deep abdominal breathing. Really getting good diaphragm excursion, opening up those air passages. Yeah, so that's kind of what I've been doing with people, and again, I haven't obviously been treating the people needing to go into the ER. There might be some different approaches for really extreme presentations.
I have a couple of little dogs that are going crazy.
They don't like it.
Tempted to take them for a walk, well, they need to walk.
Oh, right, I know. Well, you could pop a mask on and
Yeah.
take them out. I mean, obviously for non-sensitive people, it might not bother you. Like, I mowed my lawn last night, I couldn't find a filter because I was racing to get it done, and it didn't bother me. But, again, that's part of that baseline, where is your health at? How much toxicity are you capable of taking on without it impacting you? Headache is another big symptom I'm seeing show up too. And that's just, that toxic discharge is accumulating in, the head for people. Kind of frontal headaches are been pretty common. Which kind of segues nicely into the migraine question. So I added to your question causes, because to me, identifying and treating the causes is 95% of my success of migraines. So by far and away, food intolerances shows up for people. So I would say usually between 80 and 90% of the time, if we do gut healing and identify the food intolerances, they clear up or dramatically reduce. For the other 10 to 20%, certainly we always talk about hydration. We talk about potential environmental triggers that could be existing in the home or in the workplace or somewhere in the environment, which can be anything from mold to toxic buildings. We rule out things like dehydration. We rule out things like issues around vision changes, focusing too much when the eyes aren't able to be corrective. Exceedingly rare is there an actual neurological component to it, where it's truly, a space-occupying lesion or a brain chemistry actual dysfunction. Hardly ever see that, but it can happen. And beyond that, I'm really focused on nutrients that tend to improve duration and severity of headaches. So that's treatment-wise, first and foremost, magnesium, pretty high doses of magnesium in an absorbable form. I'm looking often at some of my favorite herbs. Butterbur is one of the biggest ones. I usually do kind of more personalized formulas. I do a lot of personalized homeopathics that can often work depending on the individualizing symptoms. Some of the basic nutrients, B vitamins, can often be helpful. But again, by far and away, it's the identifying and removing of the inflammatory substance that's coming into the body on a regular basis. So, working with hormones, thyroid, adrenal, reproductive hormones, sometimes that plays a role, especially if the migraines are cyclically oriented for women. I often find a lot of success balancing hormones. Again, just toxic accumulation, whether that be from a food or whatever, often a detox can be really diagnostic or not, but oftentimes we can see the diminution. It kind of depends on what you're working with on an individual level, the severity of them and how they show up. I'll often do really meticulous migraine diaries with people to really try to identify what forces are in play. So that's kind of a starting point. Migraines are a big one, so it's kind of can come from a lot of places. Any other questions about that one? Or help you out a little? Okay. Tylenol alternatives. So Tylenol is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. Well, actually, is it in the class of NSAIDs?
No.
I don't think it is. Yeah, it works on some of the interleukins that are part of the inflammatory cascade. It's not an NSAID, so it doesn't work on the COX-2 pathway, but it does work on the COX-1 pathway a little bit, which is similar to what NSAIDs do. So what Tylenol does is it basically severs some of the intermediary steps in the inflammatory cascade of the immune system. And I was just mentioning a couple of those totally in a row. So why we use Tylenol, therefore, is to diminish the inflammatory response, which is what results in pain, swelling, and heat. That's synonymous with inflammation. So the idea of chronic pain, treating it with Tylenol, is a starting point for a lot of people. Of course, problem with Tylenol is that it's not very friendly to the liver especially, but also the kidneys. So the body has to detox that compound, and if it's being used regularly and in large quantities, it's dangerous. It actually can cause cirrhosis. I mean, Tylenol can literally cause liver shutdown, and thousands of cases every year, tens of thousands. So it's not the best thing, in my opinion, to use for a hangover, because liver's already burdened. Why are you going to go give a Tylenol and smash it again with another toxin? So then, okay, well, what are the alternatives? On a really mechanistic level, how do you interface with the same inflammatory cascade? We can talk about some nutrients that do that. Fish oil in high concentrations does a really good job of that, and it's the same mechanism of action. So that's something to look at. Salicylates, white willow is what some of these are derived from, and so sometimes white willow in high concentrations can do the same thing, white willow bark. There are, if it's pain we're working on, there are some really great homeopathic formulas. We've kind of gone over some of those. We dispense some of those at the clinic. Totally different mechanism of action, but can reduce pain. I really like using high concentrates of turmeric, high medically extracted concentrates of turmeric. Doesn't work for everybody, works great for some people with pain and inflammation. Those are some of my go-tos. Of course, I'm always interested in finding the root cause of why you need it. But those on a natural medicine platform, I think side by side, work pretty, in my experience, pretty comparatively. You need to get them on board for longer. They're not like immediate because of where Tylenol hits the inflammatory cascade. It's pharmacological dose, so it's very powerful input very quickly, whereas these other ones take maybe a few days to really get on board, but can be equally effective. So those are some starting ideas. Yeah. Any other questions about that, or any other? Yeah. Lena.
So for immediate pain,
Yeah.
I don't know what toothache, I use cloves, but I mean, just like immediate pain. Is there something you'd be able to do because you really don't want to wait days?
Right. Usually, my best bet there is using homeopathics. Arnica is my go-to favorite, but there's some combo formulas I really like. Toothaches and stuff have a lot of success with aconite, so there's a few remedies depending on the presentation that can really benefit quickly. And don't get me wrong, these other therapies, fish oil and turmeric, they can work pretty fast. And also don't forget about hydrotherapy, like ice, hot and cold contrast. Man, I've seen water and contrast temperatures do powerful things with pain and inflammation. So that's my go-to for sure with everyone is implementing the healing power of water and temperature. So really, really good tool there.
Can you overdo it on fish oil?
It's possible, especially if you have a health, concern, or if you're on like a blood thinner. I've seen a very small number of people react to fish oil, but it's few and far between. So no, there's no real toxic dose. I mean, you can take a lot of it, and it's not going to harm you. That's the nice thing about everything I'm proposing is there's no adverse effects. They're all, the side effects are benefits. Like with turmeric, one of the main features of that herb is it's highly liver protective. So unlike Tylenol, where, well, maybe, you're decreasing inflammation and pain, but you're hurting the liver, with turmeric, you're decreasing inflammation and pain, and you're helping the liver. So, in my mind, a way better approach if it works, and you're using a highly medically prepared version of it.
I know that black
that's why when we talk about the bioavailability, even black pepper, it really makes it more bioavailable, but nowhere near what some of the medically prepared versions can do that don't involve black pepper. So the best is to really understand, which formulas are going to be the most well absorbed and distributed into the tissues. The amounts of black pepper are probably small, so it's probably not that bad when you use it, but the food-based version of turmeric, I would not medicinally give that to someone. Over time, if you do a lot of it, it might have an impact, but not in an acute setting. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, so what are we talking about, fruits and vegetables and detox and everything, are we putting in, spices and?
Absolutely. Yeah, we talk about turmeric, ginger, and so yeah, we'll go through detoxing spices in the class too. And, those are a couple to mention, but yeah, love and talk about even kind of roots that you can juice that are really promoting a detox. So yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any thoughts on intermittent fasting?
Intermittent fasting. Well, we did a lecture on that recently, so that's on I think it's on the website. But yeah, I mean, I love intermittent fasting for people if it fits the picture. Intermittent fasting is the idea that you do some fasting, but for short durations, like even within a 24-hour period. So yeah, I do it a lot with people, but it won't be a major focus of the detox. It's just more of a strategy when, specifically if we're working with metabolic issues around blood sugar, is a great tool. If we're working on a sustained weight loss program, eating less frequently can be a really good strategy versus trying to really limit your calories, which is not very sustainable. I find that intermittent fasting is sustainable for people. And furthermore, I really like the concept of not eating as often because it means we're not digesting all day long, which I think we put way too much work on our body in that regard. So yeah, it's a great strategy.
So a question I have with the detox, how does your body know that, how does it know not to hold on to the toxins because it might think that you're depriving it of something? By fasting.
Yeah, I mean, usually it's kind of, we talk about, I mentioned the healing, assisting the healing power of the body. I do think the ability to discriminate is pretty powerful in terms of the body at a cellular level being aware of what hinders function and what enhances function. So I don't get the sense that there's a lot of confusion over what is friendly and unfriendly. I mean, I think that that's part of our cellular architecture and wisdom of our immune system, detoxification systems, is to identify foreign, unfriendly substances, whether those be food particles that are an intolerant food or whether that be an environmental toxin or what. Yeah, I think it does a good job identifying. I'm sure there's small exceptions to that, but generally speaking, I don't think we have an issue, most people have an issue determining. Yeah. Okay, anything else? Right, thank you guys. I'll hang around to answer questions. As I said, if Detox, you want to be part of it, give us some information so my staff can reach out to you and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Did you? Okay. That's a little premature. Well, but I don't think we need to seriously. I mean, this is, if it was one, it'd be one thing if it was like we were ramping into successive cycles really profoundly and didn't have any concept of why you might be where you are right now, which is not the case. contagious. And
Right.
you have a good sense of that. I really would just say, I hear you. Let's hang tight just a little bit longer.
They were all
Really? Shoot. Yeah.
heavy metals.
Yeah, and just Roundup is nasty.
I know.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's probably a toxic burden there, but I wouldn't say that like that one exposure for cancer. That would be a big leap.
I know. No, I wasn't going there. But
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's part of the load for sure.
I've never had so many symptoms so
I know. Yeah, it's kind of your whole body's freaking out. I know. Yeah. I'm there with you, and I want you to be
right, no,
in touch with me because,
definitely.
yeah, and I'm glad you kind of psyched yourself up by coming in today.
Yeah,
Going to the
yeah,
class.
I
So,
did. Is improved,
good.
and based on, I'm able to function, is just what, we talked about.
Great. That's a
So,
step.
Yeah, but I, it's gonna be a little while.
Okay, keep me in the loop.
I will.
Friends with Margaret Brown. And I watched them do this and I'm really excited. I just need to double check with you. In 2000, I had a TIA and they found out that I had something called factor 5.
Oh, yeah, factor fiber implementation, sure.
So my blood thickens. So I'm really excited to do this because they put me on 12 years of
Oh, yeah.
and then I started.
It kind of scares you about green veggies and stuff.
Well, yeah, but I ate green veggies all along. They just adjusted me, and I was on high doses. Then I started noticing some issues, some gut issues, and some cognition issues. And I did research, and I worked with Pamela Langendorf, and we did, and a doctor in Seattle, and we did fish oil and nattocercanase.
This type of issue.
Yeah, and some special blood tests, and literally scared my MDs so much that they got me to another specialist who said, well, we don't know why they did 12 years of Coumadin.
That's not standard protocol.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. So I'm off of everything. I do a little bit of fish oil, a little bit of nattocercanase, but with all the vegetables, Mandy, do you have any concerns?
No, not at all. I think it will actually be preventive. So, yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
We brought the checkbook. Can we write a check?
Sure. Yeah, if you want to just get a check and make sure for Coeur d'Alene Healing Arts, and if it's you and your husband who do it.
Yeah.
Perfect, and then you're all
Then
tidied
we
up.
don't have to do it.
Yeah, well, you just make sure that you maybe like put a little, well, you'll write your name on it, so I'll know how to associate the contact information in the email, so that we're communicating.
Okay.
Sounds good. Yeah. We
I'll
just
just
on the
leave it
back.
back there.
Hey, Debbie. Good. Yeah. That's what I heard, yeah. Well, and what you could also very easily do is ask them to customize it for you. All the juice places around here are happy to do that. Yeah. So I mean, for sure, like this first one looks pretty okay. The Energizer looks pretty okay. You know, the thing is, there's a lot of fruit in here. So what I would do is I would just make a few adjustments for you. I would just, ask them, hey, I'm doing a program with a physician. Can you guys tweak these a little bit? And, if everybody adds up, can you make them custom? I almost guarantee that won't be a problem.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then you can skip that hassle part of it.
Yeah, and do I have to check and see how?
No. No, know, and if you do it ahead of time, they'll probably give you a whole day's supply, and you just drop it. No, you don't want to do it. You want to do it a day at a time. Well, that doesn't make good sense from the standpoint that I was, so you're going to lose a decent amount of value of that juice if you let it just sit for days. I don't think so. It's probably a centrifugal juicer, which is all the more reason to do it the same day. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think so. I think what we would do is probably, so that, it's not, you already are mostly plant-based. Yeah. So what I almost think is you could maybe condense the bulking phase by a day, and then maybe condense the juicing phase by a day, so that you're done kind of coming out on like that Thursday, and then on the weekend you can just maybe be a little bit careful and be as on it. And I don't think you'll lose much of the value there. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So I sense we at least want to land one day where we can really control it. So we won't need to adjust the time. You and I can just communicate that. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. To me, that's a great reason to do it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Cool. Well,
so
we'll
much.
probably get you advice.
Okay, sounds good. You want me to do that? I need to make adjustments, right?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
So my sister's considering doing the detox, but she couldn't come tonight.
Okay.
And she is a patient of yours. I don't think she's been in a while since her surgery, where she had part of her pancreas and her gallbladder out. So you helped her right before that. And so having those two things is, do you think the group is fine for her, or should she try and go through it more like one-on-one with you, if she were to do it?
I think she did in the group. I think I just need to make sure, is that good?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that if she does join a class, that I'll, touch base with her real briefly and do a quick review, because we've talked about, sugar and everything and all that. So we'll just need to make a couple of adjustments, but I think she needed a class. It'd be great if you were, auditing together.
Okay, so she doesn't need to make an appointment to come in.
No, I'll just make sure that
contact you.
I know her situation, and I'll make some tweaks about the approach.
Okay.
And if she wants to proactively say this is what's going on right now, or I want you to be aware of these symptoms, that would be great if she just gave me a heads up if she wants to.
Okay.
But by no means does she have to. I'll have her chart available to make adjustments.
Okay. Okay, I'll
Cool.
call her.
Good.
Yeah,
I hope to see you guys. That'd be awesome.
Thanks.
Okay.
All right. Bye, thanks for the lecture.
You're so welcome.
Hi, is this the same as when you, I don't know if you remember me, because I haven't been there in a while. sure it's wheat. But
Yeah, well, you can
I've been trying
do
to
something
not eat
fermented
this
or-
and not eat this, and I'm like, just
Yeah.
crazy. But, yeah, I got the rash in the bottom of my left foot.
Okay.
Well, sort of, it's like, and it's, it itches, so it doesn't really show up very much sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it's a great tool to be more precise about what food is.
Yeah.
You're getting more insight there.
And why that is, but, so would it, so you're saying it heals, well, it might help with certain things because I got an old injury, a car accident, but, you said I had premature arthritis?
Arthritis, yeah.
So that would help. Is
Well,
that- I remember.
what'll be interesting is if it diminishes the way that you feel it. I mean, some of that joint degeneration is long-term, as you said, so that degeneration might not totally, very likely will not just magically dissipate, but the way in which other things contribute to that degeneration, like the inflammatory substrates and substances that are also in that joint space, can really diminish, and therefore diminish your sensation of how that impacts you.
Yeah.
So,
Because I had it really, like really bad, as far as the stiff, I would just be sitting in a long car ride and then all of a sudden it was stiff and I could not move it at all. I mean, and then I started getting into the health food, I started to really pay attention to what I was eating and I noticed I didn't have a problem anymore.
right. Well, see, there you go. That's a
And
perfect
so I was thinking I might do that, but for some reason it's back again and I don't know what that is, but I just,
Yeah.
thinking
Well, again,
it's got
it's a
something
great
I'm doing wrong, yeah.
great diagnostic to work on to see if that helps.
Yeah, to see, so I'm interested in that, to see if that is, but my friend has, I wish I could get her to do this, I don't think she will, but she has trouble just walking, the doctor keeps removing something, I don't know if it's planters warts or something like that, with that.
Shadows or minor warts, yeah.
I think she has both, but she keeps on, she has a lot of trouble walking, her job is walking, she has to be standing, so I don't know if it would help with that. Is that,
But I think
know
it's
what
very
that is.
possible.
It's possible.
Those conditions, absolutely. And obviously, again, if there's a weight issue too on top of that, I don't know if that's the case for her, but
Yeah.
that would be a primary treatment goal, would be to diminish the burden on that tissue. Yeah. I mean, I think there's very little that wouldn't benefit from detoxing. It's just a
Yeah.
matter of, is that something that resonates with